Good evening. Welcome to this month's Town Administrators Report. I'm David Watts Jr., and with me is our Town Administrator, Steve Mayo. Steve, welcome.
Thank you. How are you, David?
Doing well. We're back from our 2-month hiatus.
2 months, just 1 month.
We didn't do July.
July. Well,
Yeah.
we took a month off.
Yeah.
I guess you could look at it that way.
So we're back. We're back. Hopefully you're having a
Very
fairly
nice.
good
How
summer.
about you?
Not bad. I'm watching all the lawns, including my own, go brown.
Yes, that's. Who sang that song? The Mamas and the Papas? All the leaves are brown. All the lawns are brown. Yeah.
We could do a variation on their song.
There'll
Yeah.
be more following on that, folks. I'm sorry, but
Yeah, soon.
soon.
Soon. And ironically, what we're going to talk about is water.
Yeah.
Specifically Lake Quannapowitt. In June 27th, if I remember correctly, a report was presented to the Board of Selectmen on a study that has been done on Lake
Right.
Quannapowitt and what can be done to make it a recreational resource once more.
Exactly, and I think to really strain this analogy even more, boy, did that throw cold water on the whole meeting, I'm telling you. But Mike Collins did a great job, our town engineer. He had a committee. I think that at some point there were 19 or 20 people on this committee of a lot of professionals in the community that really took probably 18 months to sit down and study and to see what can be done. First of all, what are our goals
Right.
for the lake, and then what can be done to get there. And it's kind of like when you get a bunch of attorneys in the room. There's all these different opinions. You have a bunch of scientists in the room,
Yep.
and there's a lot of different opinions. So, but they did a real great job, and I think they really had two very basic goals.
Well, before we get
Okay.
into the goals, let's give the general
Okay.
populace a little bit of background on Lake Quannapowitt. There are a number of us who are old enough to remember when it was a recreational resource, when there was swimming as well as boating on the lake.
Boating, water skiing even as well, years
Well,
ago.
we're glad to see the motorboats gone, but and leave it to the sailboats and the paddle boards and kayaks and canoes. But Lake Quannapowitt is 250 acres in size. It is defined by the state of Massachusetts as a great pond, which opens up all sorts of things. Most people in town probably don't realize that as a great pond, it is licensed, or it's required to allow for emergency landings of seaplanes and
seaplanes, yeah.
amphibious planes.
The key word being emergency.
Right.
Yes.
Which we have seen a couple
We have,
times
yes.
over at least my lifetime. The average depth is only 6 feet. Maximum depth is 11 feet, which is over in the area just before BB Cove.
Right, that's right, kind of in the people that don't know BB Cove, kind
Right.
of Quarter Street, where Quarter Street dumps out
Yep.
into Maine. It's in that area there.
Yep. It's called an impounded lake with control dam outlet at Lowell Street, which is that one outlet that goes by the Cumberland Farms
Yep, then goes flows
property.
down there. Yep.
and flows down into the Saugus River. It was glacier-formed kettle hole, which was a term I found very
Yeah.
interesting. So it was formed millions of years ago during the last ice age, and its volume currently is 489 million gallons. Sounds like a lot, but it really isn't.
It really is it's a lot less than it used to be years ago. Let's put it that way. It really is a shallow pond.
Yeah.
And in that creates a lot of these issues that we're going to talk about.
Right.
It's also where it used to get flushed through a lot, and you think about it, water flowing in and water flowing out. The inlets to it are much restricted than they were even when we were kids.
Well, a lot of them were destroyed when I was a kid when they did all the building up in the northwest corner. There were 5 inlets that came in where the newer of the office buildings is located. And then there were 5 outlets that went out. So essentially, the lake for thousands of years was self-flushing.
Yeah.
It would come in, it would circulate around, it would go out again. But all of that building of Lord Wakefield, the Lakeside Office Park, American Mutual, which is now Converse,
Route 128.
Route 128, basically cut off those inlets and all but that one outlet, which caused it to become basically an uncirculating dank hole of water.
Yeah, exactly.
You know.
Exactly. In fact, a lot of members of the committee have come to see me. I think that maybe one of them even did a show here on the lake. Did his own, took advantage of WCAT, which people should in the community. We were talking about it as a community station. That is a big part of this issue, is that it doesn't get flushed a lot.
Right.
And there is some concern on the fact that the quality of the water coming in, or that may be coming in as it goes through some of those developments there, may not be what we would want to flush it with. So that is something that I know the committee has been struggling with as well. I think that that's something that, again, will be continue to be looked at, but that is part and parcel of the problem.
Well, and add to that, it was a dumping ground for a couple of decades when there was a power plant down on North Avenue.
Yes, yeah.
Wakefield had its own power plant. Most people don't realize
Yeah.
that in the 20s and early 30s. That was largely cleaned out a
Right,
decade
and
ago.
capped. And
capped.
Yeah.
But also the fact that people use much more in the way of chemicals and fertilizers
Phosphorus,
and bug killers and everything else on their lawns today, which also flushes through the sewer system into the lake,
Right, or runs off from some of the lawns in the area.
Right.
Right, directly, yeah.
which has added to the pollution that we're seeing,
Right.
that is bringing about more lake grass, which
Yeah.
is being pulled up by the boat trailers this year in huge piles down at the ramp. And the other thing is cyanobacteria, which is all through this 21-page
Kind of a
report,
new word we all learned.
Yeah.
huh? The cyanobacteria.
which I'm not sure we really wanted to know about.
One thing I do want to point out with the, there's in-lake approaches and out-lake approaches, and one of the out-lake
Yep.
approaches certainly to stop that flow of the phosphorus-based chemicals or what have you into the lake. One thing that, and I'll give Dennis Fazio, our Director of Forestry and Grounds, a lot of credit for. Before it was fashionable, years ago, he switched whatever fertilizers he is using around the lake and in that area, especially in the common, to, I would say healthier products that don't harm the lake. So
Right.
he was way ahead of that curve, so that has helped. You can't buy a lot of these fertilizers anymore. Or actually, I should say, I think maybe this was the last year. Last year was the last year you could even buy them in stores. I'm sure there's people that have a lot of bags or boxes or bottles of these things
That they're gonna
stored in
use
their
up,
sheds that
yep.
they're going to use up. But that is, part of an educational end when you look at these on-land approaches to help out too. And that's going to have to be going, but that's a long-term educational public policy that we need to move forward. But that has to happen anyway. But we have some more in-lake approaches that we should talk about that really is what we've been discussing.
And let's talk about some of the suggested solutions, because, we haven't had swimming at the lake now for 25 years, 20 years?
I'm going to say, I'll say at least 20 to 25 years.
Yeah, because originally there were two beaches. Colonel Connolly was for the little kids, and the Lower Common was for the teenagers and the adults.
Right. That was very unofficial, by the way.
Yeah,
People need to know.
but it was the way
it was the way it
yeah,
happened.
especially when I was a kid in the 50s. And of course, we no longer have power boats, which is a good thing. But we do have sailboats, we do have kayaks, we do have canoes, we do have paddle boards. So it's an enormously popular place to do that. I take my kayak down there regularly myself, although I have to say this year is the first year that I've actually had to wash down the hull when I get the kayak back because of all of the bacteria and everything, the algae in the water this year that just sticks to the hull.
Yeah, this year was kind of the perfect storm or lack thereof storms where you had a nice mild winter, and I love the mild winters, everyone knows that. But that lessened the amount of liquid in the lake, less snow, what have you, have less liquid. The drought all this year, the heat all this year has really led to kind of a perfect storm, again, to use that analogy. And even today, you can see the lake turning a little bit in color, a little bit worse than it was even yesterday. So, and this is the time, August, late August, early September is the time when we normally would see these, what we call algae blooms, where because of the lake being shallow, because of the lack of circulation, and really the lack of oxygen in that, you get these algae that blooms and grows and then rises to the surface and causes that discoloration, which is a problem visually, causes the odor, which is a problem when you're walking around it. But more importantly, if you were to ingest it or what have you, could cause you to become ill. So, we've got all those things swirling around or not swirling around, and maybe that's the problem. So how do we resolve that? So we looked at a number of, or the committee looked at a number of different solutions, and maybe we'll go through them. So
let's talk about some of the solutions that they're talking about, because quite honestly, if we don't do something about this in the fairly near future, we're going to lose this fantastic resource that we have in Wakefield.
A great recreational and I think economic engine, and really kind of part of our identity as a community is the Lake Quannapowitt. So,
but we've also talked about on this show how it can potentially drive people downtown to the restaurants and other things, potentially to help make that even more of a economic resource.
Exactly.
So what has been suggested? Because I'll tell you, the 21-page report, and hopefully eventually it'll be up so other people can read it, goes into a lot of scientific detail. But let's try and summarize what some of the ideas are.
All right, let's talk about one of them, which is it's been swirling out there. People call it the solar bee solution. And really what this is a number of devices that are solar powered that would be on the lake, around the lake, and are just there to kind of swirl the water around, for lack of a better term, to move it around and create some aeration and oxygen in the water. Apparently, this approach has been very successful in some other communities. It is a fairly new approach. There is I think Santuit Pond in Mashpee has had great success on it, and there's some others down the Cape. There is a pond in Ipswich that we are I'm actually hoping to go on a field trip within the next month to see how they're working, or that type of system is working there. Those are, you would need a number of them, and it is a high-ticket item, and it's about a $500,000 item. Now, question is, would we lease them to see how it worked? Would we do anything? So we're not even at that point yet. There's going to be public discussions and presentations of this. I don't want anybody to think I'm getting ahead of it. So that is one approach, and that was actually adopted by this committee, and I think they actually voted on that approach, and I think that was for 13 members that voted, that was 9 of them supported that sort of approach for an inlay control approach.
Okay.
Another approach that they talked about, which is, and I guess that first one was, let's say that is a kind of a natural type of approach. Okay, that's you're not adding any additives.
Right.
Another approach that was talked about was aluminum sulfite phosphorus control, which would mean basically putting chemicals in the lake, and
much like people put it in their pools
in their
today,
pools or their aquariums,
Yeah.
or what have you.
Yeah.
So this approach was supported by less than a majority of the committee. 5 voted for it, 7 voted against it, and this is, like I said, dumping some aluminum sulfate into the lake. Supposedly that kind of like, I guess if you have algae, it kills the algae, it drops it to the bottom, and what have you. I have spoken to a number of members of the committee. I've read in the paper items from others that are really in favor of this approach, some of which are, and members that have spoken to me are dead set against it. So again, this is something that there's going to have to be some more discussion and really learning on. In fact,
Is the concern possible unintended chemical
I think
consequences
unintended
down the
consequences
road?
down the road. I think that some people may remember that in the 70s, the town it was actually suggested to the town when there was a big weed problem that weed harvesting wasn't the only way, that we should actually have dump arsenic in the lake to kill the weeds, and that is what happened. And that ended up being years later, oh no, that probably wasn't the best thing to do because of what happened later on. So I think there is some concern with that.
Right.
But I will tell you, as late as just the other day, a very talented town engineer sent me how many pages is this report? About a 40-page report to review on on low dosage of aluminum sulfate in another lake that they were using somewhere else. So this is a approach that is certainly being used and talked about elsewhere, as is the aerating approach. So those are two approaches. I think another approach that I think we all can kind of understand, or at least I can understand a little bit easier, is spot dredging.
Yep.
Now there are areas where there has been a lot of silt and that is really almost clogging the lake and not letting it circulate as well as
Right.
it should.
Right.
Dredging in these areas will deepen the water. Supposedly, I guess, make it harder for plants to grow and what have you in deeper water.
Well, because the sunlight doesn't penetrate as far. Yeah.
But the question is, what do you do with the soil and the
Right.
muck and what have you? It's very expensive to move it off site. Would we have to become creative and build some sort of a berming system? Maybe do some connective walkways around the lake. So there's a lot of, you kind of can get your creative juices flowing on what to do with
Sure.
that there.
Sure.
So that is another spot dredging, but dredging is something that to me kind of makes some sense.
Yep.
I can only because I am not a scientist. I'm a layman. Geez, to me that sounds like something that in certain spots makes some sense to me. And the committee looked at spot dredging as being very preferable, with 12 people on the committee voting for that. Mine's better than mine. A total dredge of the lake, they were all against it, probably because of how expensive it would be, and would that even solve the problem?
Right.
I think that's something that we would certainly have to, if we were to do any dredging at all, get the Army Corps of Engineers involved in that and hopefully get some help from a state and federal level to do that. So,
Well, as a great pond under Massachusetts law, one would think that would be a requirement anyway.
yeah, requirement is one thing, and what you can do is something else.
Right,
The
right.
penalties far is number two.
As far as remedial solutions, until a final plan is conceived and voted on by the townspeople, because that would be a town
That would
meeting
be,
vote.
well, the funding of it certainly would be, yes.
Yeah. For years, we had a lake grass harvester that would
Yes.
go out onto the lake, bring up the grass, and they would put it probably in the town pit
Yep.
today. Has that been looked at,
You
at
know what?
least as a remedial solution,
I
so
think
that
we
you're
still
not
have the
fouling
harvester.
the
We still have
center
it.
boards and things?
We still
Yeah.
have it.
Yeah.
I don't frankly know whether that is still an operational piece of equipment, but it certainly could become that way.
Right.
I certainly think that'll be part of it. I do know that we are doing a little bit more studying now
Yeah.
on the water quality, and as a matter of fact, Mike Collins and I authorized kind of. I don't want to say, I don't even know what it's called, some sort of a new meter, because the one that we had was actually stolen. Someone stole it, so we're going to buy a new one so we can do out of a regular selectman's budget to
Yep.
handle those things, and we will do that with that. So imagine that. It must be a wonderful piece of equipment that someone stole it. I'm sure it's kids, this is what happens, but so we are doing that. But even getting those testing and those results and the water results, what have you, there aren't that many labs that even do it in the country.
Right.
So it's getting those back is something. So I think that filtration needs to be done. I think personally, opening up and getting more water into the lake would be helpful, and that may be as easy as cleaning out some of the obstruction people of coming in. But the problem is that as things have settled, is some of those inlets that were inlets to the lake are a topography level higher, lower now
Yeah.
than the lake itself. So you don't get that flow of water in
Right,
there.
right.
So we've got to do something to help reverse that.
But also somehow, because the Walker's Brook development was done in the 50s around the same time as all the building,
Yeah.
to divert some of the water for
Kind of
floodplain.
it bypasses
Yeah.
and then hits the
Yeah,
Mill River.
because they were
later
trying
on.
to do some flood control.
Yeah.
And that also had the unintended consequences of basically stopping up Quantapowhat.
Yeah. I talked to a gentleman actually as early this morning at one of the coffee shops, and he was telling me that he was involved in the management of an industrial park, and they had a small kind of a pond, pond, and they had, he called it a pump, just a pump with some aerating.
Yeah,
And you know, and it looks nice. It looks aesthetic, makes it into kind of a fountain effect, and that really cleaned out the whole area. So I guess if you could replicate that along, what did we say it was 250 acres, under a 250 acre
250 acres,
250
yeah.
acre
Yeah.
parcel, you would need a number of these to make that work.
Sure.
But that's something that we should and can look at now. Problem with that solar bee approach, if we want to talk about that, is that it does kind of create some obstacles in the lake too.
Right.
And kind of takes it away from some of the sailing and boating and paddleboarding that we talked about. So it's a lot of things to consider here. Well, we'll have to.
Well, and the
them
sailboats
under-
already have a natural
Yeah.
impediment,
Maybe they
which is
can't
the
go-
old Indian fishing weir
Right.
that comes out from
Yeah.
Cemetery Point to that one unnumbered buoy,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, there already is. But the lake this year, you've been on it, is very low.
It's very
Uh-huh.
low. It is almost impenetrable
Yeah.
because of the amount of algae, but also the amount of lake grass this year, particularly in the cove, is really horrendous. So it makes it very difficult to paddle efficiently from shore out to the middle of the lake. It keeps getting caught in the paddle.
Yeah, I am really looking forward to the discussions on this, and to my continued edification. And like here's my book on it that I keep adding to it. I have a number of citizens that really have taken a lot of time on their own to, and these are people that are much better versed in this sort of this genre than I am, and spent a lot of time and a lot of thought about it. So I do appreciate everybody who's brought these into me, and I do read them and I study them and I
Right.
think about them. I talk to Mike Collins a lot about it, and there's probably no one better than Mike Collins in the community to talk about water and water effects. But I will say this: we're committed to doing a couple of things here. We're committed to bringing the lake back to quality standards that make it swimmable and fishable. That's what we are looking for. And eliminate the blue-green algae, cyanobacteria from lake due to toxicity and being competitive with healthy lake organisms. So that are our really two major goals
Right.
that I think the committee that was appointed by the selectmen adopted. I think that the selectmen certainly adopt them. I think the community adopts them. We got to figure out how we're going to get there. And really, that's what the next few months of discussions will be on it. And then we'll have to figure out how to fund it.
Right.
Luckily, some of these approaches you can actually fund on a lease basis. So you're not putting so much money out front that geez, we try that for a year or two, it doesn't work. Look at what we've spent all this money. No, well, we did spend money, but at least it was a lease that we could maybe get out of. So
Sure.
that's what we're looking at.
Sure.
I'm looking forward to my next field trip, which will be up to talk about in Ipswich. So I will. I'll ask. We'll probably make that. I'll ask them to make that public, and we'll go up there and people can see how it works. I'm sure the committee will go, but any members of the public that want to go, hey, they're welcome to.
It'll be interesting to see how it all falls out. Now, there's one group in town, Friends of Lake Quantapowhat. Have they weighed in on this?
The Friends of the Lake Quantapowhat, they have members that are on the committee. I
Okay.
will say this, they have certainly been advocates for keeping the lake clean and pristine and what have you. I think they're like the rest of us, kind of waiting to see this expert opinion to come up with a solution. I think that for years they have been funding the testing that has been done. They actually was the group that bought some of the meters. I don't know what they're, the meters. They had reached out to me and said, with all the other projects going on, they didn't have the funds, and really they shouldn't. That should not be their responsibility. So, I was able to find some money in the selectmen's regular budget to cover those types of costs. But I think there is no group in town that really is more interested in making sure this lake looks good, is clean, is usable from all different aspects than Friends of Lake Quannapowitt. So their president, Bill Conley, was a member of the committee for a few years on that. I've been in contact with him, on occasion. So certainly they're behind the efforts to clean this up 100%.
This is not something.
But I wonder if in their group they're probably in the same. What's the method to go? Because there
Sure.
is a scientific difference of opinion.
Well, and sometimes science takes a little while to really go through the different options
Yeah.
to come up with what the best solution is.
I certainly think I come back to, what I understand. I understand the spot dredging. I think
Yep.
that's important. I understand the aeration. I think that's important. And those are two things that certainly can be tried with no ill effects.
Right.
Other than you are spending resources and time.
Right.
And I don't diminish that in any respect. I do think that we do need to flush the lake more. There needs to be more water flowing through that. I think those things in combination. I'd like to see personally, this is Steve Mayo's personal opinion without having any public forums on this. I'd like to see those personal items looked at and probably tried out before we would ever go towards a chemical solution. Other than the lack of chemicals on the off lake going through.
Right.
Another thing that we need to do, and we do continually, is sweeping. We do street sweeping around that lake all the time because of we don't want items flowing into the lake.
Right.
The other caveat that is coming is that the town, under its NEPDES permit, which is a national stormwater situation that comes down from the federal government, the DEP there, is that we are hiring a stormwater manager. So there will be someone that will be more focused on stormwater and stormwater management, and part and parcel of this is the lake. So we need to do that anyway. That's already been budgeted. That's going to happen. So the person that comes in, he or she, is something that will be jumping on this sort of issue too. And then we'll get another opinion along with all the scientists. So it'll be great.
Now, aren't those regulations also being tightened up next year?
Yes, we are actually going to get a directive that will be much more tighter, much more stringent from the federal government, which significant fines if we don't toe the line. And I got to say, we have been, and again, I'll give our town engineer, Mike Collins, a lot of credit, Dennis Fazio a lot of credit, Donnie Schneider, our highway supervisor, a lot of credit to making sure they aren't using certain chemicals and things when they salt the roads. And Rick Stinson, our DPW director, a lot of credit for being ahead of the curve on this, setting us up for success as we get what I would consider to be another unfunded mandate from the federal government. We didn't have enough problems with cleaning up the lake. We'll get another unfunded mandate.
But in some ways, this particular one is to our advantage because now it forces us as a town to do something.
I hope so. I think that we're doing a lot of what they're going to focus on anyway. I think the lake is a separate issue in itself. But so we need rain, we need water, we need all that stuff.
And we've run out of time
We're out of
once
time.
again. So we'll keep on this one. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next month.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the summer, everybody.
Absolutely.